I'm a basic researcher. I study the etiology of substance use disorders, which means that I focus on the big question of why some people are more likely to develop problems than others. What causes substance use problems? What are the risk pathways that can lead to the development of problems? We know that substance use disorders are incredibly complex. They're influenced by genetic factors and by the environment. We know that there's a strong genetic component. The heritability is about 50 to 60%, depending on the drug that you're looking at. And what that means is not that 50% of the reason an individual develops problems is because of their genes, but 50% of what contributes to the differences between all of us in our different patterns of substance use or our likelihood of developing problems is due to differences in our DNA, and the other part is differences in our environments. That said, we know that there is no gene for alcoholism. There is no gene for addiction. There's no gene for depression or cardiovascular disease or any of the complex health challenges that really influence large numbers of our population. Instead, what there are probably thousands of genes, each of which increase or decrease our risk just a little bit, but that overall contribute to our propensity to develop problems. And we know the environment plays a critical role too. Environmental factors found in our families, in our friends, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And this is what makes substance use disorders so incredibly challenging to treat. And this is why I became a basic researcher. And this is also why there's a place for talking about genetics when we're thinking about prevention, intervention, and treatment. I spent a year working on a psychiatric unit as an undergraduate, and I had the privilege of working with individuals who were struggling with substance use and mental health challenges, and I saw the toll that it took on them and on their family members, and I watched them rise to the challenge to get better, to do the hard work, and to end up back on the psychiatric unit again. And that's what led me to go into basic research, with the idea that by understanding the causes, the underlying biology of these disorders, we can essentially and more effectively one day do better and more tailored and personalized prevention, intervention, and treatment. Right now, when we think about prevention, intervention, we focus more on this part of the puzzle, on the environmental side, on the individual and their environments. That is a critical piece, but it's not the only piece. In the future, this won't be the only piece we focus on. This is about to change. How many of you have heard of, by show of hands, the Precision Medicine Initiative? So a handful of folks out there, more than in most of the audiences when I speak, likely because there's so many individuals who are involved in practice here. This is the kind of thing that in my research circles, we're talking about all the time. We talk about precision medicine constantly. This is why it's so important to get out of your silos, because I assumed everyone sat around their dinner tables and talked about precision medicine. The Precision Medicine Initiative was launched in 2015 by President Obama as part of his State of the Union address. The idea behind precision medicine is that we are going to revolutionize the way that we practice medicine. So right now, when do you go to your doctor? When you're sick, right? When something's wrong. And most of us don't rush right off to our doctor immediately when we're sick. We think it probably might go away, so we let it wait for a little bit to see if it gets better on its own. And then you go to the doctor when it's gotten even worse. And individuals with substance use disorders often go into treatment when things have gotten really bad. And when you go in to see a practitioner, if you have disorder X, you get treatment Y. We do one-size-fits-all treatment. We treat to the average patient, and then we have to do a lot of trial and error until we can get it right. And that is extremely costly for the individual, for their family, for our society, for our healthcare system. We absolutely can do better. Precision medicine is the idea of moving beyond a one-size-fits-all model and moving medicine to a place where it is personalized, predictive, and preventive. The idea of personalized medicine is not something revolutionary or new as well. Think about our vision. When you're having trouble with your eyes, when your eyesight is going, you don't go into the eye doctor and they reach into a box and pull out a set of glasses and hand them to you and say, good luck, this will help. Maybe it would help a little bit, but maybe it would actually make things better if you've ever looked through, or worse if you've ever looked through a friend's glasses. And sometimes we do that in medicine too. By knowing about the underlying biology of what contributes to vision problems, we are able to do more tailored, personalized, effective intervention. And we should be able to do that for all of medicine. In 2016, Congress signed into law the 21st Century Cures Act. It had strong bipartisan support, unlike most everything these days. Everyone could agree that this is important. It put $1.5 billion of funding toward this initiative over the next 10 years, and the majority of that is going to fund the All of Us research program. What All of Us is a research program that was just launched this year, and it is going to enroll 1 million individuals across the United States into an incredibly intensive longitudinal assessment of health. We are going to collect genetic information, other biological information, technology. We're going to collect information about lifestyle, about environment, a huge matrix of health-related information on 1 million individuals from diverse backgrounds. I was just last week at a meeting that brought together a group of scientists to launch the All of Us program and talk about what kind of data do we want to collect. What are the critical, pressing questions we need to address in this massive new health research program? And you better believe that I was there making a strong point that we had to look at substance use problems as part of that. Just last week, there was a report that came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association about the state of health in the United States, in which they found that across all states, if you look at the top 3 risk factors, tobacco, high BMI, alcohol, and other drug use. And what they went on to conclude is that specific diseases and risk factors are not getting better, they're getting worse. And in that list, drug use disorders, alcohol use disorders, they're on the rise, they're increasing, and they warrant increased attention. So we are very hopeful that we can harness the All of Us cohort and the media attention that is surrounding the tremendous need that is here and the health burden associated with alcohol and other drug use disorders to start to make a difference. So what are we going to do with this massive amount of data? What can we do to improve human health? The idea is that we can apply data science in order to do better classification and diagnosis, and that this will ultimately lead to better prevention and intervention. So right now, when we think about individuals who meet criteria for an alcohol use disorder or an other drug use disorder, we lump them all together in one group, but they are actually a tremendously heterogeneous group. Kenny was talking about this morning. They likely have different genetic predispositions. They have different combinations of those 1,000 or so genes that are increasing risk. They have different environmental risk factors. And right now, we classify and treat them the same. What we will be able to do with genomic, other biological information, information on brain activity, physiology, behavior, lifestyle, environment, is to create more informed, more data-driven, more homogeneous ways of classifying individuals, which will allow us to develop more tailored treatments. So in this paper, which appeared in Science, the authors, who are leaders at one of the National Institutes of Health, say, new diagnostics will redefine mental disorders as brain circuit disorders, and new therapeutics will focus on fine-tuning these circuits. Now, if all of this sounds very space-agey and sci-fi to you, go back with me 25 years ago when there was this crazy idea called the internet.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard
Or
it.
around
I'd never
or
heard it
about.
said. I'd always
That's
seen the
right.
mark, but never heard
Yeah.
it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
Yeah, I heard be around
big
or
fight
about.
up in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC. GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
say to that,
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
That was less than 25 years ago. Now we have an entire generation of children that can't remember a world before you had a computer in your pocket all the time. Think of how our lives have drastically changed in ways we never would have predicted just over 20 years ago. And what has made that possible is rapid advances in computing. So I want you to just look at this white line for a moment on this graph. That's the line that refers to Moore's Law. Moore was one of the co-founders of Intel, and what he observed was that the number of transistors they could put on a computer chip was doubling every year. And this is what led to the tremendous increase in power and decrease in cost that has allowed us to all carry little computers in our pockets and has changed the way that we live our lives. That's how quickly computing is advancing and changing. That white line is Moore's Law. This green line is how quickly genetics is advancing. We are eclipsing Moore's Law. Genetics is advancing at a pace unlike anything that has ever been seen, faster than computer technology. In 2003, we sequenced the first human genome. It took 15 years. Took 15 years and $3 billion to sequence one human genome. It's 15 years later, in 2018, it costs less than $100 to sequence a human genome. We sequence thousands of them every day at our high-throughput genotyping facilities. This is the future. The future is predictive, personalized. Genomics and computer science is going to change the way that we do medicine and that we do healthcare. It was only 60 years ago that we even discovered the double helix of DNA. This is the future. So where are we now? We are clearly not there now. But what we are doing is we're collecting huge samples of individuals. I talked about the All of Us program and the cohort of 1 million individuals that's being collected by the National Institutes of Health, but there are scientific investigators that are collecting cohorts of individuals who are affected with substance use disorders, with cardiovascular diseases, with cancers. There are population-based samples that are going on, sample studies like our Spit for Science project and our college students. We're collecting large numbers of individuals, And we are scanning these genomes. And what we're essentially doing, gene finding at its most basic, is scanning the genome and looking for areas where individuals who are affected with a particular condition or who are high on a particular outcome you're interested in carry a different genetic variant than individuals who are low or who are unaffected. And we're able to scan through the entire genome and identify these thousands of locations that increase risk or that decrease risk. And what this enables us to do is identify the genes and the underlying biology of a particular disorder, and we can then create risk scores for any one of us. I have my genome that's been sequenced. I have my own personal risk scores. And we can use these risk scores for prediction, prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. So we've already started doing this. The building blocks are in place. The problem is that right now, our risk scores are really crummy. It takes huge numbers of people to do gene finding. That's why there's going to be the million cohort of all of us. So our risk scores aren't very good. And to this date, the best predictor of whether one is at genetic risk, at elevated genetic risk for a substance use disorder or any other health outcome still remains family history. But even without the specific genes, we know a lot about the genetic predisposition to alcohol use outcomes. And what that means is that we can use that information to think about how we can redesign our prevention and intervention, not to stop focusing on all the important things that we do right now, but what else should we be focusing on? So we know that substance use disorders are highly heritable, but one of the biggest misconceptions is that what that means is that heritability means that some people are more likely to become addicted to a particular drug because of the way their body responds to that drug. In my experience, that's the biggest misconception about the genetics of addiction, that the genetics of addiction refers to some people are just much more likely to become addicted to a drug than others. It's how they respond to that drug. That is just a tiny part of what is one's genetic predisposition to develop substance use disorders. So in the area of alcohol use problems, for example, we know how the metabolism of alcohol works. So when you drink alcohol, there's a set of genes, the ADH genes. They code for enzymes that break that alcohol down into a byproduct called acetaldehyde. There's another set of genes, the ALDH genes, that break down acetaldehyde into acetate, and that's what is eliminated from the body. It turns out that acetaldehyde is a really nasty byproduct. It actually makes you sick, it makes you nauseous, and so you want your body to eliminate that really quickly. Bodies want to eliminate that quickly. There is a particular version of one of the ALDH genes that codes for an enzyme that's ineffective. People that carry that genetic variant cannot break down that nasty byproduct. So every time they drink, they feel nauseous, they flush. It turns out that when you carry that genetic variant, it's highly protective against developing alcohol use problems, right? When you feel sick every time you drink, you're not likely to keep drinking at the levels by which you can develop problems. This is one example of a genotype that is involved in metabolism that in this case is protective. As an aside, this is actually how antabuse works too, as some of you might know. Understand the underlying biology, it opens up options for drug development. It turns out that actually this particular variant is almost exclusively found in individuals of East Asian descent. And so I'm not going to talk about this at length, but I do just want to mention that this is why it is so important to have diverse populations included in genetic research, and this is why the All of Us project is going to be very intentional about capturing the diversity that is encompassed in our country. Because of the ancestral background of people from different parts of the world, There are differences in gene frequencies, and if everyone is not represented, everyone is not going to equally benefit from the advances that come from genomics. I'm working with a colleague in African American studies, and we are actually developing a large-scale genetic collection project that will focus on African Americans. It will be led by African American scientists and geneticists with the idea that we need to make sure everyone is represented and everyone benefits from the advances that are going to be coming. So if it isn't just how our bodies process alcohol, what is the genetic predisposition to developing substance use disorders? It turns out that the majority of that genetic predisposition that makes some people more at risk than others is via dispositional, temperamental, and personality traits. We did a study some years back where we followed an entire birth cohort of individuals who were born in a geographical region of England, about 14,000 pregnant moms whose babies have been studied since they were born. And what we looked at is how early can we predict which are the kids who are going to be risky substance users in adolescence. And it turns out that the mothers' reports of their kids' temperaments when they were toddlers, before the age of 5, were predictive of which were going to be the kids who were having problems in adolescence. And there were 2 different groups of kids who were at elevated risk. The first were kids who were highly sociable, extroverted little kids from the time they were very little. And the second group was a very different group of kids. They were kids whose moms reported that they had emotional challenges from the time they were very little. We have our dispositions, we have our DNA sequences from the day that we're born, and they show up in different ways across development. I'm going to take a side detour for a moment here, and we're going to think about what are some of the ways that those dispositions show up.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have 2. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
So what can a marshmallow tell you about your life? These were a series of experiments done by a psychologist in the 60s in which he gave kids the choice between one marshmallow now, or if they waited 15 minutes, two. And they followed up those kids decades later. And what they found is that the kids, there was tremendous variability in the kids' reactions. Some of them didn't wait at all. Some of them could wait patiently. They found that the kids who were the ones who were much more likely to impulsively eat the marshmallow, they were more likely to develop substance use problems later on in life. And the kids who could delay gratification, that was associated with a whole series of positive life outcomes. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with marshmallows. When they went and when brain imaging became available years later, and they imaged these kids' brains, what they found is that those who were more impulsive, who had less self-control, who really wanted that very enticing thing that was right in front of them, they had much more activity in the midbrain area, which is sometimes called the hot brain or the emotional brain. It's the part of our brains that are associated with strong emotions and impulses. The kids who were much better at delaying, they had more activity in what's sometimes called the frontal lobes or the cool brain, the rational brain, the brain that helps us think through, do I want this now, or is there something more important to me that I can wait for, that I can delay gratification? We know that these are patterns that are seen not just in impulsive kids, but they're seen in individuals at different developmental stages, and it's a pattern that's also seen in individuals who are at greater risk for substance use disorders. Our brains are all wired differently, and individuals who are genetically predisposed to be more at risk, their brains are wired differently as well. We talk about different pathways of risk. So when we're thinking about what is the genetic predisposition, there is no one. There are many predispositions, and there are many pathways that put some individuals more at risk than others. We talk about the externalizing pathway, which encompasses sensation seeking and impulsivity and less self-control. We talk about the internalizing pathway. These are individuals who are more predisposed to develop problems because they're more prone to anxiety, to using alcohol and other drugs as a form to cope. This is related to how our brains process anxiety and fear. And evolutionarily, there's good reasons why these things would exist. We need to have some folks who were impulsive, who wanted to get out there and be hunting, right? When our brains were evolving. You had to be a little bit crazy to want to go run with the large animals. We also needed people who were a little more anxious and fearful so that we all survived, right? This physiological response to drugs, that is only a small part of why some individuals are more at risk than others. We're born with our predispositions. These traits show up in different ways across development. So this is what a highly impulsive, sensation-seeking 5-year-old might look like, peering down from the top of a tall tree. And this is what he might look like at 25. But he also might look like this. Or instead, he could look like this. Some of you all will know that this impulsive little guy is my impulsive little guy, and he comes by it honestly. His father, my brother, are all fighter pilots. They have found alternate ways of channeling their risky dispositions. My child at age 8 out of nowhere, looked over at me and said, "I can't wait till I can drive a motorcycle and drink beer." 8. Last weekend, he's 11. I said, "What do you want to do this weekend?" He goes, "How about skydiving?" I'm raising the high-risk impulsive child that I study. God definitely has a sense of humor. I see his nanny sitting out there who has a whole series of stories on him as well. The point is, we have dispositions that can put us at elevated risk, but they are not destiny. It's how our genetic predispositions come together with our environments that lead to, ultimately, our outcomes. Right now, when we do prevention and intervention, we focus almost entirely on the environmental side of the equation, and that is a critical side to focus on. But what we aren't doing is capitalizing on this entire other piece. In the future, genetics will take us in directions we can't even imagine right now. But we already know a lot about what those dispositions look like at different developmental stages. And so what we can do is use that information to also augment our prevention and intervention efforts. So Patricia Conrad has a project called Preventure, a program in which they focus on kids who are at high risk on these externalizing and internalizing dimensions. And Ann Moss-Rogers, if she's here today, has come up with funds to bring this to some of our school systems and try it here. We are also working on how we can implement this, how we can give personalized feedback to help individuals understand their risk and to help think through how they can use their dispositions to channel them for good and to achieve the things that they want out of life, and how they can avoid potential pitfalls. I worked with a local school here to start to rethink how they do substance use prevention with their middle schoolers, moving away from, as Shannon talked about earlier, a straight education and fear-based model. Alcohol is bad. I'm going to tell you a lot about it and a lot of the consequences, which we know is ineffective on its own, and instead shift to what are the underlying factors that contribute to why some individuals are more likely to use, and how can we start to address those. Substance use disorders are an incredibly complex challenge, and we are crippling ourselves by only focusing on part of the equation. We can harness genetics alongside the environment to develop more effective prevention, intervention, and treatment. So in conclusion, genetics and related basic science fields are going to change the way that we practice medicine and that we think about treating substance use disorders. But even now, our understanding of how genetics works, what are the mediating variables, how they work through these elements of personality, temperament, decision-making, we can use that to enhance our prevention and intervention efforts. I want to end by acknowledging that all of this research has been generously supported by the National Institutes of Health, and to thank you all for your time.